No surrender, no defeat. Maybe it's time for an Evercade retreat.
Hello and welcome to the Evercade Retreat. My name is Gene Joke and today I'm ranking and reviewing all the games from the Atari Lynx collection Volume 1 for the Evercade. In case anyone doesn't know, the Atari Lynx was an Atari handheld released I think in about 1989. It was a rival for the Game Boy, but it had full colour screen, it was 16-bit, much more powerful than a Game Boy, and 8 batteries like a mofo. I think it's 2 editions of the Lynx released, obviously the original Atari Lynx, and there was the Mark II, which was slightly slimmed down and just had a better design to it in my opinion. Now, I never owned a Lynx myself, I never had a handheld system, but I did play on my friends quite a lot. But I don't think I played a single game from this collection on the Lynx back in the day, so there's no nostalgia here for me, aside from for the Lynx as a whole. But anyway, I think that's enough preamble, so let's get on with the ranking, shall we? Gordo 106 is a platform game where you control a monkey called Gordo. His number is 106 and he's trying to escape an animal testing lab. It's a very bog standard platformer. Well, actually saying it is bog standard would be a compliment. For the Lynx, I think the actual animation of Gordo is quite nice, the graphics aren't too bad, but the gameplay and level design do let it down. They let it down big time. The levels don't really make a lot of sense, they're very frustrating to navigate, and the Gordo isn't really that much fun to control. I can see what they're going for, but it does seem they utterly failed to do it. And this game, obviously the whole animal rights thing is obviously pro animal rights, but after playing this game it makes me hate animal rights. It makes me want these animals and these monkeys to suffer a painful experience like I've experienced playing this game. Okay, that's hyperbole, but it's not a good game. BasketRall is a sports game where you can beat up your opponents. Yep, it's the same game that was on the Atari Collection 2, although that was the 7800 version. This handheld port is a little bit different. Aside from having more chunky graphics, you don't have a teammate, it's just you versus various CPU opponents. The moves are a little bit different, but the key gameplay is largely the same. However, this version just sadly doesn't really work very well. As you can see from the visuals, it doesn't look particularly great with the chunky Lynx graphics, and the gameplay and movement just doesn't really feel that good as a whole. Really, this is a lesser port, unfortunately, and if I was going to play this game, I'll always play the 7800 version. Jimmy Connor's Tennis is, well, it's a tennis game. There's a reasonable amount of options, the graphics are pretty good, but the gameplay is where it falls down. Getting your timings right for serving and returning the ball is pretty difficult. Getting the positioning right is difficult. Then the game itself is quite long-winded as well. It's a tennis game and tennis games are usually fairly good. This one is not a good one. Yeah, I really didn't enjoy this one. I haven't completed it because honestly I just detest playing it. Maybe I need to get good, but at the end of the day I'm not a huge sports game fan and this one is not good enough to make me want to keep playing it. Remnant of Planar Wars is a space shooter. Now this is a type of game I normally quite like, and this one is really quite basic. You shoot your lasers, you dodge the enemy fire, you shoot the enemy, rinse and repeat. There's really not a whole lot to it. There's also a whole energy system with your lasers. You can't fire too frequently or you'll use up your energy, you have to wait for it to recharge. It's a nice showcase of the scaling on the Lynx, but other than that there's not really much else to it. You fight through waves of enemies and shoot them. It's okay, but ultimately it just gets a little bit tedious. Malibu Bikini Volleyball is a volleyball game, and it's clearly developed by the same team that did Jimmy Connor's Tennis. It suffers a lot of the same problems. Fortunately, it's not quite as bad in that respect. More playable game. Again, there's quite a few options. The graphics are pretty good. Yeah, it's not a bad little game, although it's not the best volleyball game on the Evercade. Maybe it's the worst, but there's not that many of them. Again, this suffers from my lack of interest in sports games, but again, it's pretty good. It's fine, I suppose. Well, it's almost fine, maybe. It's passable. If I'm going to play a volleyball game, I'm probably going to play Touch and Go from Gelco Arcade 2. Cybervirus is a first-person shooter of sorts for the Lynx, and technically it's pretty impressive. The controls are a little bit unusual the way it works for moving forward and things, and you're not navigating sort of complex maze-like levels rather than big open ones. You essentially have to go and destroy a few targets and things like that. And yeah, it's pretty good for what it is. And as a technical showcase, I think it's impressive. As a game itself, it's a little bit tedious. But again, I can see what they're going for, and it's impressive on that level. And you can have some fun with it. It's just, yeah, it's just a good showcase, not a great game. Not really a huge much more I can say about it than that. Mega Pack 1, as the name suggests, is a selection or a mega pack of various small games. It's definitely very easy to overlook this one. You have Parafly, which is a Game & Watch inspired game where you're basically catching these people parachuting down. There's Password, where you're essentially guessing words. A bit like Hangman, just without the morbid nature of it, I suppose. And Password will unlock a bonus game when you beat it. There's Lynx Sketch, which is basically a drawing program. There's Sound Tool, which is pretty much what you expect. You mess around with the sounds on a bunch of tunes. Chopper X is essentially a Flappy Bird style thing where you control a helicopter moving its way through a level. There's Pontiac, which is pointless. There's also a variation on Yahtzee and a blackjack game. The hidden game is a text adventure, which actually manages to work with the way you sort of scroll through and select words to use. Overall, it's an interesting little pack. Not one you'll play that often, but again, there's some fun to be had here, and it's an interesting little exploration. Super Squeak is a action puzzle game. Viewed from a top-down view, you have to run around, shoot the enemies, collect the numerous power-ups, and turn all the blocks on all the tiles from blue to pink. Rinse and repeat. There's a good amount of levels here, and they are a pretty good size for this sort of game. They're bigger than you'd expect. There's also masses of different pickups and power-ups. I think there's quite a good game in here somewhere, but it doesn't quite come together. I find the levels just, I say they're a bit too big. They just feel like they dragged on a bit. Where your character moves doesn't feel quite right. It's just a little bit off, but I can't quite put my finger on why. There is a lot to like in this game, but like I said, for me it doesn't quite come together. But again, it's not bad, and with a large amount of levels and things, it's one you can have, playing on a handheld and tap away at gradually, which is how I had to do it, because I did find I would only do one level at a time, then I'd had enough for a bit. So overall, it's okay. Power Factor is a run and gun where you control a dude with a jetpack, which sounds cool. And graphically, I think it's quite impressive for the Lynx. Your main character, Red, because he's dressed in red, is well animated. There's a reasonable amount of weapons and moves and things to do in the game, but it does make it quite awkward to control. But once you get used to it, there's not a bad game here. But it doesn't play like your typical run and gun. You can't just go on charging because enemies will shoot you from off the screen and things like that. There's some impressive looking bosses, and it's not a bad game, but it is flawed, and it's definitely one that I think many people struggle to get into. I certainly did. It really took me a bit of perseverance to get very far in this one, or to even get past the first level. It is impressive for the Lynx, both visually and what it's trying to do in terms of gameplay. I think it runs very well. It does fall short of its ambition, but I think it will reward you if you do put the effort in, if you can bother to put the effort in. Zump is a puzzle game. You control a character, you essentially have to get to the exits on the levels, platforms will crumble beneath you, and yeah, I mean, you've probably played things like this before. On the Indie Heroes collection, the Grunier Zerka collection, or Game 3 on the Grunier Zerka collection is like this, and Ronnie's Tale as well. This is a fairly simple version of that. And yeah, it's fine. It's quite a fun little game, although the controls are a little bit oversensitive, which does make it a bit more challenging than it might otherwise be. It's okay, it's perfectly fine, but there are better games of this type on the Evercade. Scrapyard Dog is a platformer where you control a dude to get off to rescue his dog, the titular Scrapyard Dog. You go through the levels throwing cans at your various animals, some of which are anthropomorph, they can have guns and some aren't, which is weird. And the game is quite odd as a whole. So you throw these cans as a weapon, and if you throw it, it will launch out, it will bounce and hit an enemy. But if you throw a second one, the one you threw disappears, which is kind of significant to when it comes to navigating and working out how to attack your enemies. The basic mechanics of the platforming don't feel particularly amazing. It's also hard to determine what you can jump on and what's a platform and not, and even some of the obstacles aren't really that obvious. There's a fair number of levels and there are bosses at the end of each stage, although none are overly challenging. Visually, as you can tell, it's not really up to all that much. I think even for a Lynx game it looks fairly basic. There's something that's very sort of 8-bit home micro about this game. It does make this game interesting and is not immediately apparent, as there is a lot of hidden things in this game, whether it's the shops in the levels, the upgrades contained within, or various shortcuts. I found these little touches really added to the game and made me appreciate it a lot more than my initial fairly, I suppose, mediocre first impression was. Overall, I can't say it's a great game. It's definitely deeply flawed and there's things I really don't appreciate about it. It's rough around the edges, and no platforming masterpiece. But I said it has a weird charm to it, and it was an interesting playthrough despite its various flaws. Dracula the Undead is a point-and-click adventure based on Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. Funny that, although nothing to do with the movie. Visually it's quite impressive, it's got a whole sepia tone thing going on and looks the part. The sound is okay, what there is of it, but again it's not really the main feature of this sort of game. Controls are a little bit clunky and take some getting used to, but because the type of game it is, it doesn't matter too much, you can manage it perfectly fine. Naturally this sort of game, you're either going to like it or you're not. If you're not into point-and-click adventures or you don't have the patience for them, it's not going to be for you. But if you do, I think you'll find a lot to enjoy here. I did, but it took me a long time to get around to playing it. Unfortunately, it doesn't cover the whole novel. I believe there was going to be a series of games, but they never happened, maybe because of how long the Lynx didn't last, or maybe sales, I don't know. Which is a shame, because it's the beginning of quite a good series, or potentially a good series, but never mind. So yeah, to sum it up, it's good for the right people. Awesome Golf is, unsurprisingly, a golf game. Unfortunately, it's not really that awesome, but it does hold the title of being the best golf game on the Evercade. Not that there's any competition. It's a perfectly acceptable golf game, there's not much wrong with it, it's just, like I say, it's not a brilliant one. Mastering the swings, use of clubs, the putting, takes a little bit of practice. It's not it doesn't hold your hand like more modern golf games do. Again, it has a fair number of options and courses and things, and yeah, it's a pretty good little golf game. Nothing special, but solid enough. Graphically, it does exactly what it needs to do, so yeah, nothing to complain about here, quite a solid little game. Ishido, The Way of the Stones is a tile-based or block-based puzzle game where you're laying tiles and matching up by colour or symbol. The basic rules, like I said, are quite straightforward and quite easy to learn. However, mastering it and really understanding how the game works and how to be successful at it takes time to master. It's not a flashy or exciting game. The graphics are perfectly functional, but they don't do anything to excite you. But the gameplay, when it gets its hooks into you, becomes very much a one more turn kind of thing. It's a very chilled game overall, and yeah, like as I mentioned, very addictive. I know it won't appeal to everyone, but those that do like these sorts of games, they should absolutely love this one, and it'll be one that you'll come back to quite often, playing on the handheld, and find yourself almost addicted all over again when you come back to it months or years later. It's absolutely perfect for the handhelds. Super Asteroids and Missile Command is exactly what the title suggests. It's a double pack of Asteroids and Missile Command. Not just standard Asteroids and standard Missile Command, these are enhanced versions, almost sequels or whatever you want to call them. Asteroids has sort of an energy bar system and power-ups. Missile Command has an upgrade system. Essentially, if you don't fire too many missiles, essentially you can build up credit for buying upgrades and various power-ups. And these really do add to the game. Whether you prefer this over the sort of the classic simplicity of the originals or not, well, that's personal preference, isn't it? Yeah, I think these are really good versions, and yeah, the double pack, in a sense you could say you're actually getting 18 games on this collection, not just 17. Well, of course there is the whole mega pack thing as well. Crystal Mines 2 is, well, I suppose it's a riff on the Boulder Dash style of gameplay. You control a mining robot going around collecting gems, blowing up boulders, digging through the ground and solving various puzzles to beat the levels. Essentially most levels come down to collecting a whole number of gems and going to the exit. Of course it's rarely that simple, at least after the first few levels. There are enemies to shoot, items to get and use to solve puzzles like TNT and things. There's enemies that can't be destroyed in conventional manners and puzzles to get around them, much like there was in Boulder Dash. Visually it's perfectly fine, everything's clear and you can tell what's supposed to be what. The sound's okay, but the gameplay is where it really shines, and the sheer volume of levels. Safe to say this game will keep you playing for a long time and has a few secrets as well. Admittedly, it did take a little bit of effort to get into. I don't know if I was expecting something maybe as pick up and play as Boulder Dash, which it isn't, is a bit more complex than that, but it definitely rewards you for that little bit of effort it takes. Loops is a puzzle game where you have to create loops out of puzzle pieces. These are assigned to you randomly, although you can see the next one coming. The bigger the loops you make, the more support points you score. It has a couple of different game modes which do play a little bit differently. There's difficulty slider, there's 3 different tunes to choose from and they're all quite good. And the game is horribly addictive once you get into it. I talked about this game in other videos, so I'm not going to go on at length about this one. But yeah, it's a game I've put a ridiculous amount of hours into. When I first played it, I wasn't that impressed. I was just like, yeah, it's okay, and literally gave it 5 minutes and didn't really bother. But it came up in the Katie's challenge on the Evercade Discord, and I started putting some time into it. Before I knew it, I'd put 40 or 50 hours into it. That's within a week, and it's easily my most played game on this collection. So there's no other place for it, but the top spot as being my favourite game on the collection.
Final opinions.
So the collection as a whole has 17 games on it, and they are a mixed bag. There are some things which I would say are genuinely quite bad. There's also a few games on it which are genuinely absolutely brilliant. The rest is, like I say, it's a mixed bag. They're quite middling or they're curios, and they definitely won't be to everyone's taste. And even the really strong games aren't necessarily going to appeal to everyone because, well, nothing does it? But the simple fact is it's a high quality collection with a good amount of variety. Now I do imagine the graphics, a lot of the chunky pixel graphics will put some people off, and the fact the sound isn't amazing on most of these games again might put some people off. And it's a legacy cart, so it's not the easiest thing to get hold of, and some of the prices might be a little bit on the high side. But if you can get it at a reasonable price, I would highly recommend getting it if you can. To score the collection, I would have to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Honestly, just for loops alone, I could probably give it a 10, but that game just, really kind of sucked me in. So, putting my addiction aside, I will settle on an 8.5 out of 10 for this collection. Anyway, that's it for this review. I will leave you out with a silly song based on one of the games, as I always do, and I'll see you in the next video.
Caught in the loops.